Hi there. So this is feedback for the test papers that were set for both Year 10 and Year 11. What I would like you to do is I'd like to have the paper open in front of you, and then as I go through this, I would like you to identify sort of where you've done strongly and where you need to work on. What you need to work on at the end, then there'll be three tasks. You pick one of those that you struggled with, essentially, or where you've underperformed. So the first question asks you, what is euthanasia? Here, okay, I was going for the answer, or a point that kind of focused on saying how it was mercy killing. Okay, so that's the first thing I really wanted to focus on. And then for getting the second part, there's so many things you could say. You could talk about it being illegal in the UK. You could talk about different types, such as assisted suicide. You could talk about the Catholic view, them being against it. You could talk about different groups like Dignitas and Exit who carried out, etc., etc. Then the next question, okay, is to look at describing Catholic views on life after death. Now, three of these answers, okay, are all to do with Jesus. The first thing you say is that Jesus taught about it, and you can refer to him on the cross, speaking to the penitent thief and referring to it as paradise. Now, the next one is that Jesus proved it, and this, when you explain that, was to do with his resurrection, proving life after death. The third thing, you say that Jesus allowed it to take place because of atonement. This is because when he sacrificed his life for us, it meant that God and human beings were reconnected, and that when we die, we can be with him in heaven. The next two answers are to do with immortality of the soul and judgment. So you'd say the next view, what's called the Catholic ones, is they believe there's life after death because our souls are immortal. And they believe that our souls will go to one of three places: heaven, hell, or purgatory. Finally, you can talk about Catholics believe in the idea of judgment. So when we die, we will die as an individual. This is individual judgment, and also, as taught in the parable of the sheep and the goats, that we will be judged at the end of time in the process called final judgment. Now, the next question asks you to look at explaining Catholic and Jewish views on the sanctity of life. Now, guys, in all honesty, the answers here are exactly the same when it comes to the Catholic view, when it comes to the Jewish view. That they believe that all life is sacred, as it was made by and belongs to God. You can talk about the fact that all life should has a plan. You could be talking about how all life has all life should be protected. That only God decides when we live and die. Only God decides if life is ended. So therefore, we shouldn't murder. So you can talk all about those ideas. And it's the same teachings that come up time and time again. All right, so thou shalt not kill, a time to live and a time to be born. A time to be born and a time to die. You can also talk about how we are vessels of the Holy Spirit. God breathed life into Adam. Thou shalt not kill. There's just so many. When it comes to the therefores in this question, where I think was probably the most challenging part of this, was you need to refer, therefore Catholics disagree with abortion, or disagree with euthanasia, or they believe all life should be valued, so live life to the fullest and do God's work, and those types of answers. Exactly the same then as well for Jews, for the therefores, okay? So you can focus on euthanasia and being against abortion and all of those sort of things, okay? Now, in the final one, it tells you to look at euthanasia should be made legal in the UK. All right, so it should be allowed. Now, just because that sort of phrase talks about the UK law, it doesn't mean that it doesn't want Catholic and Jewish and non-religious views on the topic. So, what you need to do in your answer, you need to make sure you have 5 paragraphs for and against. Now, the Catholic view on this, okay, very simple and straightforward. It's all those ideas I've just listed when it comes to the sanctity of life. So they're against it because they believe you shouldn't murder, linked to the teaching of thou shalt not kill, that they believe that all life is sacred, so therefore what's called should be protected, and you link that to the creation story. There's so many different answers, and at this point I'll refer you to your revision guides and your exercise books, because there's a lot of answers that you could include there. Where I will give you some clarification is the therefore. You would say therefore that is why Catholics reject groups such as Dignitas and Exit. You could say about the fact they support palliative care. You can say about how Catholics would agree with the UK law. And if you also then can apply the doctrine of double effect, because some of you may have done this for the final answer for your personal opinion. You can apply the doctrine of double effect, which actually a number of you did. Some fantastic answers that I've read actually that talked about this, right? They can apply the doctrine of double effect, where you can take a painkiller to end pain, which shortens life but doesn't end it. Okay, so therefore maybe we'll talk about morphine and about how that's the sort of impact that has. When it comes to the Jewish view using this answer, it's exactly the same things, but also try to ensure that your answer includes the teaching if a man was falling from a cliff and was shot, the person who had shot him would have committed murder. Okay, that's quite a bespoke one to this answer for the Jewish view. So when it comes to the non-religious view, now not all non-religious people agree with euthanasia, okay, but the humanists do. They are more concerned with quality of life, of it being a human right to decide when you're able to live and die. And then we talk about the therefore, you can talk about the fact that they would support groups such as Dignitas and Exit. You could say about that they would want the UK law to be changed. And you could also say about the fact that they believe that you should have a living will, which proves that you're okay with euthanasia and it's not the pain talking, if you want. Finally, if you're going to use a non-religious view about why euthanasia could be okay, then, should not be allowed, then you can probably talk about the slippery slope argument, okay? And this is the belief that if we were to change it now, where does that line stop? Is it that we're going to just stop at people being allowed to commit suicide? And some non-religious people do hold this view, and therefore that this isn't okay. Alright, and that's for that reason there's a non-religious view, if you want, for euthanasia not being allowed. There was one other, okay, about when we're using religious teachings against religious believers. So you could say that euthanasia could be justified by religious teaching, such as love thy neighbour. Why? Because if someone was in pain, ending that pain would fulfill that teaching. Now that isn't the view of Catholics, but it is a view that you could use to challenge the religious view, challenge the Catholic view, but using religious teaching against them. So, here is your, what I would like you to do. Out of those three answers that I've just fed back on, I would like you to redraft one of those areas that you struggled the most with. So for example, if when I was going through the describe question, you really struggled on immortality of the soul, really zoom in just to that one point. And in that one point, I want you to turn that 0 that you had for that part into 1 mark. Okay, as simple as that. I want you just to redraft the one point that you struggled with. That's task 1. If you are happy with your describe, then maybe task 2 would be more relevant to you. Task 2 is looking at the Catholic and Jewish view on the sanctity of life. I'd like you to zoom into one paragraph there and to redraft it. Particularly look at your therefores, looking at the impact and whether they are accurate. Then finally, when it comes to that euthanasia answer, exactly the same thing. Zoom in on one of those views that you feel is your weakest based on the feedback that I've given here. And if you think that is the euthanasia answer that you struggle with the most, then that's what I'd like to do, is just to pick one of those paragraphs and to redraft it based on the feedback that you've been given today. As an extension or an extra one here, I would like you, okay, to answer, alright, I'd like you to answer the euthanasia answer, but using the teaching love thy neighbour to justify why euthanasia should be allowed, if you haven't done this in your answer. So you pick one of those 4 different tasks. Task 1, that is where you zoom into a point in your describe answer and redraft it. Point 2 is the same process, but you do it with a paragraph for the explain question on the sanctity of life. And number 3, exactly the same, but about the euthanasia answer. If you feel you've done all of that, then the challenge feedback is to use love thy neighbour in a way to justify euthanasia. Thank you. When you complete it, okay, complete this in your book. Alright, complete in your book, and it'll be the starter exercise for our first lesson back. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful Christmas.